Elder Barawak, Nazarene Hebrew Institute of Faith.
Hebrew Institute of Faith, winning souls.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, family. This is Nazarene Hebrew Institute of Faith. It's been a long time coming, and also appreciated to have Egyptologist David Rohl on. Let me explain a little bit briefly of who he is. David Rohl is recognized as one of the world's best-known historians. He's not only a bestseller writer, but also an explorer, archaeologist, TV presenter, and internationally renowned public lecturer with degrees in Egyptology, ancient history, Mycenaean and Minoan archaeology, and Levantine archaeology. David is a genuine scholar with a full list of academic credentials, but at the same time is seen as highly original thinker, offering an exciting and colorful history of the world's greatest ancient civilization. He specializes in archaeological and historical interpretation of ancient legends. I hope I didn't butcher the names of
you did pretty well, Barak.
Mycenaean. Thank you. And welcome everybody. Please hit the like button. Please share the video. Please tell a friend. I know a lot of people are probably going to catch it later because we're kind of early. But welcome, Mr. Rohl. Thank you. And also, family, keep in mind that he was not feeling good. He was under the weather, but he took the commitment and a man of his word. And I just want to, before I do introduce him, I want to say I humbly and gracefully really appreciate this. I've been knowing who he was and looking at his information for like the past 9 years off and on. And one of the DVDs, parts I have of Patterns of Evidence that I told you guys about, he done a great big deal of work dealing with the Egyptian chronology. And I think like his position better than the mainstream consensus. Let's put it that way. So you're going to learn, take notes, and please listen carefully. And welcome, David Rohl. Please introduce yourself, and thank you.
Well, that's very nice to have that lovely introduction, I must say. Yeah, well, I've been at the business since I was a kid. I mean, I started Egyptology when I was 7 years old, believe it or not, writing Egyptian hieroglyphs at the age of 7. And then I went to Egypt for the first time when I was 9. And I've been year after year now, all the way through. I'm 75 now. So pretty much every year of my life, I've been to Egypt 2 or 3 times. And I love the country. I love the civilization, the ancient civilization. But I also have a fascination with the biblical text as well and the archaeology of the Bible. So I cross over between Egyptology and biblical archaeology.
Oh, wow. That's more information we didn't know. All praises for that. Okay. All right. I
think we have a little bit of a delay on the line.
As we do this presentation, family.
Yeah. Okay. So let me try and get the screen working. This might be a bit tricky, but let me have a go, see if I can do it. See if I can work out how to do this. So I'm going to go on to share screen. Let's see what we get now. And then I'm going to go on to window, and I'm going to select my window. Let's see what you get on your screen now. What do you see? Do you see the first title page?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yes, I do.
So and I want to make sure that I can actually play it now. Let's just see if the first slide works. So I'm going to start with the Wall of Time because it helps to show you where I think the whole story of the Israelite sojourn in Egypt and the Exodus and the conquest, where all that took place, when it was and where it was. But the when is very, very important. So let's see if we can move the slides forward. It seems to be working. So what you're looking at here is something called the Wall of Time. Now, the Wall of Time is basically a way of showing visually the BC period, or the before Christ period. In other words, the era before the birth of Christ. And this wall basically represents time. So on the right-hand side, you see something called 1000 BC, a great pylon gateway, and 2000 BC is down the other end of the wall. And what we have in the middle here, those colored patches you see there, are the basic stories of the arrival of the Israelites in Egypt, the multiplication period where they grew into a large population. Then came the slavery, and after that was the judgment. That's the Exodus judgment of the plagues. And then the departure from Egypt, which we call the Exodus. And then after 40 years in the desert, they come to the conquest as well. So that's the timeline of the events. But where it's actually placed in by modern scholarship, and where you're familiar from the Cecil B. DeMille movies, you know, the Ten Commandments and stuff, is it's placed in the wrong place. And I'll show you why. There is no evidence of a sojourn and Exodus during either the 18th or 19th dynasties in Egypt, which is basically where everybody thinks it took place. So it's not in the time of Ramesses II. There's no evidence for it then. And it's certainly not in the time of a king called Amenhotep II of the 18th dynasty, where a lot of evangelical Christians tend to want to put it. It's in neither of those periods. We don't have the evidence. It's as simple as that. So what I do is I look in a different time period, and I look much, much earlier in time. But actually, it's consistent with the biblical dates. So we're using the biblical chronology, but we're simply not using the Egyptian chronology. We're moving the Egyptian chronology in a different direction. So what we have with the Ramesses Exodus date, which completely fails, that's the one that you see in all your books. There's no conquest of the Promised Land at that time. We have no Jericho at that point in time. So Jericho was actually destroyed and abandoned hundreds of years earlier in what we call the end of the Middle Kingdom. And it's 690 years from that point where the city was destroyed all the way through to the time of Ramesses II, when there was just a ruin there. There was no city there at all, no population, no walls to fall down, absolutely nothing. Which is why so many academics tell you that the stories of the Bible are just fiction, and they're just a sort of pious myth. Well, they're not. All you have to do is to look earlier, to an earlier period of time, to find all the evidence for the Israelites. So when we concentrate on the time that I want to take you to, which is the Middle Kingdom, not the New Kingdom when Ramesses II was around, I'm going to take you earlier, okay? And I'm going to show you that there's a match in the patterns between what we find in Egypt and what we know about from the biblical story. So looking at our wall of time now, and I'll zoom into this period we call the Middle Kingdom, which is known as the Middle Bronze Age in history. You can see where the Exodus falls on the chart there. It's actually towards the end of the Middle Kingdom. So the Middle Kingdom is divided into two dynasties. We have the 12th dynasty, or dynasty if you prefer an American way, and we have the 13th dynasty. And in the 13th dynasty, we have a change in what happens at the particular locations we're going to point to you now. So the biblical events are in that middle band that you see there. It begins with the settlement of the Israelites in the land of Goshen. That's when Joseph arrives and he brings his father and his brothers into Egypt. We call that the settlement period. And then after that, we have this prosperity or multiplication period where the population grows into a huge population. That is followed then by the slavery when the Egyptian pharaohs enslaved the Israelites. And then we have obviously the Exodus plagues and move on to the Sinai wanderings and then the conquest after that. So we have in this model that you're looking at now, the Israelites arrive in Egypt in the reign of a pharaoh called Amenemhat III. And he's one of the biggest kings of the late 12th dynasty in Egypt. That's when they arrive. I'll show you all the information about that soon. And they leave in the reign of a very, very minor pharaoh of the 13th dynasty called Dudimos in the late 13th dynasty. You've never heard of him, I'm sure. But he's actually the pharaoh of the Exodus. He's the one at the time when Moses took the Israelites out of Egypt. What I'll do today is I'll show you all the evidence for that. I'm going to have to rush through it because there's quite a lot to get through. So normally it would take me 3 or 4 lectures to give you that whole story. I'm going to try and do it in one stretch. So we'll see how we go. It's followed in Egypt by something called the Second Intermediate Period, which is like a dark age in Egypt, because obviously when the Israelites leave, Egypt and the people of Egypt are left in a situation where they have no slaves anymore. Their army's been drowned in the sea. They can't defend the country, and so it turns into a dark age with an invasion of people called the Hyksos, who come into Egypt and in fact enslave the Egyptians. So that's a dark period in Egyptian history. But this all happens immediately after the Israelites leave. So let's look at the arrival first of all. Historical events behind the sojourn tradition. So we start with where Goshen is located. You know that the Israelites settle in the land of Goshen, which is described as being the best part of Egypt. Well, here's where Goshen is located. It's in the eastern delta, the northeastern part of Egypt. And it's a large area which is occupied basically by several cities in this particular period we're dealing with here. And it's right adjacent to the Sinai Peninsula. And of course, it's adjacent to the border of Egypt with what would later become Israel. The actual place they found where the Israelites lived, it doesn't look much here. It's just a load of fields. So that's because agriculture has taken over the area. But when the archaeologists dug beneath the fields, they found some remarkable things, which I'm going to show you now. Now, the archaeological team was led by Manfred Bietak, who's an Austrian professor from Vienna, and he worked there for many years. Between 1966 and 2013, he was digging at this particular site, and the discoveries he made were quite astonishing, very famous now in archaeological terms. The place in ancient times was called Hat Waret, but typically in Egyptian, the letter T in Egyptian is a feminine ending, and it's not pronounced unless you have a vowel in the next word. So it would actually be pronounced Haware, not Hat Waret, because the T's are dropped. So Haware means the house of the district. So it's like the governmental quarters of Goshen. It's the place where the administration of Goshen was run from this particular location. So Haware becomes Avaris in Greek and Avaris in Greek. So we have the two versions. And that's a very famous city in the legends of the past. And the Greek name of it is Avaris. So that's what we're going to call it from now on. It was a huge city, as you can see here, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of houses. Basically, it's on an island in the middle of the Nile. The white area of the city was where the white plastered area was the Egyptian quarter, and next to it was the royal quarter where the pharaoh and his court used to live. And the brown area was the mud brick area where the Israelites used to live. So it's much bigger than the area of the Egyptians. Now, when the archaeologists began to dig here, and then, as I say, that was in the early 60s, they found that the archaeology was just below the surface of the fields. What's happened here is that the local farmers over the last several thousand years have been using the mud bricks of the ancient city as fertilizer on the fields. And so they flattened it essentially, so that you have to go down just a few inches, maybe a foot or so, to get to the actual levels of the city that the Israelites lived in. Now, what they found was typically lots of graves. These are typical graves from the period. They were dug into the ground, lined in mud bricks, with a sort of mud brick vault along the top. You can see part of that vault there in the picture, so I'll point it out to you with the arrow. Can you see the arrow? I hope you can. That would have covered the whole entire area of the tomb. And so when you dig down into the tomb, you find the culture of the people that were buried in this city at the time that we think the Israelites were there. So here's a typical grave from the period, and you can see that the body is lying on its side with its knees up towards its chest. We call this the semi-fetal position. Now, this is not Egyptian. You never find that in Egypt. The Egyptians lay on their backs. They didn't have this idea of lying on their sides with their knees up in this sort of semi-fetal position. That is typical of what we call Western Asiatics or Semites from Canaan or the Promised Land, or whatever you want to call it. And the pottery, etc., associated with it is not Egyptian. So let me show you some of the evidence for this. Well, the first thing is we find these Bronze Age axes. They're called duck-bill axes because they look like the bill of a duck. And that's very typical of what we call Middle Bronze 2A. And that's the time we're dealing with here. The 12th and 13th dynasties is Middle Bronze 2A. Also found associated with the site, the actual town itself, are lots of these Canaanite storage jars, which again are not typically Egyptian. These tell you that the people who lived there, the majority of the people who lived here, were actually from Canaan. Another typical type of vessel we find is these miniature vessels. They're called Tel al-Yahudiya ware, which are used for ointments and things like that, maybe perfumes, with a little stopper in the top. That's typical of this particular period in time. It's exclusive to this period of time. All these things are not Egyptian. Here's a grand, large version of one of these Tel al-Yahudiya vessels, and they used to have little white pricks in them for the decoration, which is typical of this particular pottery. Now, that pottery in these terms that we're dealing with here is Israelite pottery. Also, the chieftains, the top boys of the society, they had these grand tombs, and in front of the tombs where they were buried, they slaughtered 2 donkeys, and they buried them in front of the actual tomb itself. These donkeys were probably used to bring the body to the tomb on a cart or something, but also buried with the 2 donkeys are 2 sheep. And that's very important because it tells us that these people were shepherds. And when the bones of the sheep were analyzed, we discovered, in fact, that the sheep come from this particular breed. They're called the long-haired Awasi sheep, and they come from Mesopotamia, northern Syria. So they don't come from Egypt at all. They come from the north, where the patriarchs are supposed to have arrived from. And we see them represented in the Ur standard here from the city of Ur, where Abraham came from. And you see these long-haired sheep with the people wearing kilts made of their fleeces. So let's move on now to Joseph and what happened to him, the historical events behind the sojourn tradition. Now, there's a very famous tomb called the Tomb of Khnum-Hotep, and this is a tomb that we concentrate on because it shows a group of Asiatics. You can see that in that row there, coming into Egypt. They're bringing produce to sell to the Egyptians. And if we go in a bit closer, you'll notice they're wearing multicolored coats. This is the only time in Egyptian history, on Canaanite history, where we find Asiatics or Semites wearing multicolored coats. And they're coming in with their children as well, and they're bringing bags with them, and they're coming to sell eye paint. So these people are coming like Midianites, coming from the Promised Land or the Holy Land, coming into Egypt to sell their produce. The leader of the group is the one on the front here. You can see with a really splendid multicolored coat. His is a really refined coat, very expensive coat. And it's typical of the higher ranks of society at this particular time. The hieroglyphs at the top should tell us that they are the coming of the Amu, which is the Egyptian word for Asiatics or Semites. And it gives the number of them as 37. So there are 37 people coming in from the north into Egypt to sell their eye paint or their kohol. His name, by the way, is Abishah. He's called the ruler of the hill country, and his name is Abishah, and that, of course, is the same as biblical Abishai. Now, after Joseph comes into Egypt as a slave, as you know, he comes into Egypt, he serves in the house of Potiphar. He then gets thrown in prison, and eventually he helps to save Egypt from a dreadful famine. So what I'm going to tell you now is about the pharaohs who were involved in that terrible period when famine struck the Egyptians. These are the two characters we have to deal with. Now, their father and son, these are from the late 12th dynasty. And the first one is called Senusret III, and his son was called Amenemhat III. And they ruled jointly for a period of about 20 years. So the father allowed his son to become his co-regent in this period. And it's the son, Amenemhat III, who was the pharaoh who helped Joseph, got him out of prison. Joseph helped to interpret his dreams, and he was the one, Amenemhat was the one who appointed Joseph as vizier, or number one in the country after him, as he ruled in the country of Egypt. This is him as a younger person. Very interesting to see the way that these pharaohs look. They don't look anything like the usual statues of pharaohs, with smiling, bland faces. These guys are shown with worry lines. You can see how depressed he looks in this particular one. If I go back one, you can see the downtrodden mouth that he has. And notice the sticky out ears on either side. This is to show that they're showing concern for the troubles of the land, of the people. So this is particular statuary only from this period by these two pharaohs. You don't see it any other time in Egyptian history. That's telling us something. It's telling us something in the art that says at this time, Egypt was suffering from a terrible plague or a terrible famine. So we go on from there. Here is the figure that I think we need to concentrate on. He started as a king quite young, probably in his late teens or maybe early 20s, about the same age as Joseph himself. As a young pharaoh, he's represented here in a statue. So we're going to sort of recreate him. Don't worry about the skin color. I know that might be an issue for you, but this is what he probably looked like, something like that. Now, we know about this famine from the biblical text. And this is Genesis 41, 17 to 21. So Pharaoh told Joseph, in my dream, there I was standing on the bank of the river Nile, when 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile and began to feed amongst the rushes. And then 7 more cows came up behind them, starved, very wretched and lean. I have never seen such poor cows in all Egypt. The lean and wretched cows devoured the 7 fat cows, but when they had devoured them, it was impossible to tell, for they looked as wretched as ever. Well, nobody's ever been able to explain how these animals, these cows, came up out of the Nile. What has the Nile got to do with these cows? Well, the reason was the Nile was the cause of the famine. So let me explain that to you. Now, on an annual basis, down in Ethiopia, in the highlands there, the spring rains come down, and they wash down from the mountains the silt and water that goes into the Blue Nile, and then that joins the White Nile, and it comes northwards in the summer months towards Egypt, and it floods the fields on either side of the Nile for quite a distance. And then eventually the excess water flows out into the Mediterranean. Now, this happens every single year. Now that the Egyptians have built the high dam in Aswan, it no longer happens. It doesn't happen anymore. But we have statistics of how high the river reached every single year during the period of the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. So where do we have to worry about? Well, we have to go down to the border of Egypt, which is south of Nubia. The Egyptians called it Wawat, to the Second Cataract in Africa. And there were 2 fortresses on either side of the river built by the Egyptians to protect them from the land of Cush, which was to the south, the Ethiopian lands, if you like. Now there, from an aerial photograph, you see the two fortresses. On the top is Semna, on the bottom is Cumma. Now along the river edges, there's cliffs either side. And in those cliff faces there, the Egyptians actually carved the heights of the flood levels each year for a short period of time in the reign of Amenemhat III and his immediate successors. Not before that and not after that, only in this period of time. Now, why were they doing that? Why were they cutting these marks in the rock surface showing the height of the river at that time? Because they were monitoring it, because there was something terrible happening, and I'll show you what that was. And this is the most complicated chart you're going to see today. So let me explain it to you. The bottom line that you see here is the normal river level that you see of the Nile all the time of the year. Now, normally, when the flood season comes, the inundation season comes, it comes up to about 12 meters above the normal level of the Nile. That's what you see if I mark it there with the blue line. That's where the flood would come every single year for thousands of years. But in the reign of Amenemhat III, our pharaoh we think is the time of Joseph, we start to see something different happen. So at the beginning of his reign, it goes up to 18 meters above the normal level of the river. That's a huge jump. That means we're getting a large amount more water arriving in Egypt at this time. Now, that could be good for Egypt. It means that there's more flooding of the fields. It means there's more silt coming down from Ethiopia, which are going onto the fields, making it very rich. They're able to plant more crops at this time because they've got more area covered than desert in the Nile Valley, so they can plant more crops. We call that the time of plenty, all right? And it lasts about 7 to 8 years. But then something even worse happens. And we know all this information from those levels that you saw at Semna and Cumma. Now, when it gets to mid-rain, suddenly they jump up to 21 meters. Now we're talking disaster. This is so much water. It's actually 4 times the normal flood level we're dealing with here. That would kill the animals in the fields. It would wash away the mud brick houses on the edge of the Nile Valley, on the desert plateau, etc. It would wipe the whole civilization out, basically. This would be a total disaster. Worst of all, it would cause a real problem from a point of view of crops. So this is what it would look like months after it had arrived in Egypt, and it basically hasn't gone off to the Mediterranean. It's still lying on the land, maybe a bit lower now, but it's still there, and the land is completely waterlogged. There's no way that you can plant in that. And Genesis 45:6 tells you this: for this is the second year of the famine. There's been famine in the country, and there are still 5 more years to come without plowing or harvest. Now, there's something important about that sentence there. The only reason that fields could not be plowed and planted, therefore no harvest, is because they were flooded. You cannot plow and plant a field if it's inundated in water. And this happened year after year after year for at least 7 years, maybe longer. Okay, now what did Joseph do? So we're going to learn now is, what did Joseph do to ease the burden on Egypt of this famine? Well, what he did was, he was a brilliant individual. He decided he would divert much of the water, around 50% of the water, away from the Nile Valley into something called the Fayum Basin, which is in sort of like upper part of the Nile Valley as you go towards the Nile Delta. But it actually is south of the capital cities, etc., and also Goshen, which is much further north. So by diverting the water into this great big basin here, he managed to get the levels back down again to an amount where they could cover it and actually start planting again. So how did he do this? Well, the first thing is he diverted the Nile with this red line you see there, which is actually a canal which was dug, which made the water flow into this lake. Now, this lake today is called Birket Karun, and it is only the darker blue area. But that itself takes about an hour and a half to drive along the coast of. So it's actually a huge lake. But in the time that we're talking about now, when Joseph and Amenemhat were alive, it expanded to this enormous lake called Lake Moeris, which then absorbed all the extra water. And it was fed by this red canal. Now, Amenemhat was so thrilled with the fact Joseph had managed to preserve the country, save it from the famine by diverting the water. He actually built his pyramid right next to the canal. at Hawara. And so this whole thing was all to do with saving Egypt from the excess water, meaning that they could then start to plant their crops again. And that canal that did the diversion is actually called the Bahr Yosef, or the waterway of Joseph. This is the name that's been with this particular canal for centuries and centuries. It's tradition that Joseph was the one who constructed the canal, who diverted the water to save Egypt from the famine. And it is a huge canal. This is it, not a river. This is the canal. This is the Bahr Yosef canal. Joseph is remembered in the name of the great canal built to divert the excess flood water into the Fayum basin. This was what made him great. So in the period of the plenty, they were gathering in the grain. That was one of Joseph's initiatives. And then when the extra flood came, he diverted the water to save Egypt from the excess water and the lack of planting. So Genesis 41, 39, 40 says this, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Elohim, and that is the word that's used here, not Yah or Yahweh, since Elohim or God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall rule over my house, i.e. Egypt, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I, the Pharaoh, be greater than you. So this is the story we have in the Bible. So we have to look now for a character who actually has that sort of status in Egypt, in the land of Goshen, which is I'm going to take you to now. Let me just have a sip of water. What you see here is the archaeologists in Goshen, the Austrian team, digging down just below the surface of the fields. You can see the corn growing above it, and they come across this large brick floor with recesses here, circular recesses, which were for stone column bases, which carried wooden columns. This is actually an audience chamber of a palace. In the palace, they found lots of beautiful gold work, etc. Amazing things which were not typically Egyptian. This antithetical dog pendant was around the neck of the person who lived in this palace. The reconstruction by the archaeologists looks like this. Now, it's an Egyptian palace, there's no doubt about that, but it wasn't occupied by an Egyptian. The plan looks like this. So it starts off as a smaller palace. You see the orange section. So let me just place that section in. So you have a hall, which is the one you just saw with the 4 columns, which would be an audience hall. At the back here, you have a robing room and a washroom and a storeroom and a bedroom. And this bedroom has, this is not a joke, it has the largest bed anywhere that's found in the ancient world. And that's pretty good for somebody who was a foreteller of dreams or explainer of dreams. The original facade of this building was this columned facade here that you see. And then later on, during the lifetime of this individual, he built 2 apartments for his sons, and they're identical. You can see they're reflected from each other like a mirror of each other. When that was added to the front of the palace, they enclosed the palace in this courtyard, retaining the original facade, but now it becomes an inner court. And they had access to that courtyard through the front colonnade, which then went through this passageway into the antechamber and out into the court. So what we have is an owner of this palace who has 2 sons, and he builds 2 apartments for them. When we look down into that courtyard, after the new part is built on the front, he has this colonnade in the front. And look at this. There are 12 columns in front of this palace here in the courtyard. Think about that number and what that means in the biblical terms. In the garden behind the palace, there were 12 principal tombs in the rear garden. So 12 columns, 12 tombs. But one of the tombs was a pyramid tomb, unlike the rest. This was very special. In this period of time, only kings had pyramid tombs, but the guy who was buried in that tomb was not a king. This is the level that you see just below the fields that survives today when they were digging through to it. And it's a platform platform for a pyramid with a chapel on the front of it here, this section at the front. And the burial chamber is actually buried underneath the ground. So this is before the burial chamber was accessed by the archaeologists. And I'm going to take you into that tomb. The reconstruction of the tomb by the archaeologists looks like this. You have a pyramid with this chapel on the front. Now, when you look at a plan of it, here's your chapel. Here's the platform for the pyramid, and then underneath the ground, there was a mud brick chamber, which was domed. It was like a dome chamber, but it was rectangular in shape with a dome structure. And what you see in the front of here is actual tunnel, which was dug through from the chapel into the tomb later, and I'll explain what this is in a minute. So here's the archaeologist digging down into the burial chamber, and I want you to notice two things. The first is these chippings here that have been collected from the burial chamber itself. They are bits of limestone, only small fragments of limestone. But then there's a much bigger piece here. And I'll show you what that is in a second, which they didn't find that in the burial chamber. They found that just in front of the tunnel that went into the burial chamber. So now we're looking from the burial chamber. This man in the Galabea here is standing in the burial chamber. And you're looking back towards the chapel, and here is those chippings that were found actually in the burial chamber. But we're interested in this thing here, okay? These big blocks of something. Here you see them close up in the front. And what you're now looking at is back into the burial chamber, and you'll notice there are three more larger pieces of chippings. They're not the small pieces, which belong to whatever this is here. But most importantly, yeah, you can see the tunnel, which goes from the chapel into the burial chamber, okay? Well, what's important to notice is the burial chamber has nothing in it. There's no pottery. There's no coffin wood or anything like that. There's no gold. There's no mummy beads. There's nothing in there at all. There's not even bones. Now, some people say, oh, well, it's tomb robbery. You tell me why tomb robbers would go in and steal the bones. That makes no sense at all. What happened here was, at some point in antiquity, but not long after the burial of the individual here, they removed the body and all the things that were in the tomb and took it away, and they did it reverently. They didn't actually destroy anything. They took it away with them. And I think if you know your biblical story, you know what that's all about. That is the time when Joseph asked his brethren, when he was on his deathbed, to take him into the promised land when they left Egypt during the Exodus. And that's exactly what they did. Moses ordered the removal of the body of Joseph and the accoutrements from his burial, and they took them all the way to Shechem in the promised land, where he was reburied, the place called Shechem, modern Nablus today. This is how those fragments were reconstructed by the archaeologists. What you can see here, that the face has been smashed off by an axe or something like that. So you have a situation where even the eyes were gouged out. Look at this great crack in the head here. Somebody has tried to smash this thing to smithereens. Now, what survives of it is the top half. The bottom half of the statue has been removed because it's a nice big shaped block, so they can use that somewhere else. But they left the head and the shoulders left in the actual area of the tomb where they smashed it. Who smashed it? Well, it's not the Israelites. It's the Egyptians who came to the empty tomb after the Exodus and took revenge out on Joseph, who had brought the Israelites into Egypt. They regarded him as the one who brought these people into Egypt, which had caused the disasters of the Exodus. Now we look at the head itself. You'll notice that it's beautifully combed. The hairdo is beautifully combed, and you'll notice that it has red paint on it. So the hair was flame red hair is what this individual had. And if you look at the skin color of the forehead here, it's yellow. Okay, and I'm sure you want to discuss that later. So this individual had red hair and a yellow skin. Also on his shoulder, he carried the scepter of office for his position as high official in the country. And it's a throw stick, not a scepter that you would normally have on Egyptian pharaohs. That tells you he's an Asiatic or Semite, because these people use this symbol, the throw stick, to tell them that they were Asiatics. That's the sign the Egyptians had for an Asiatic person or a person from the north. So that's his official insignia of office. On the back shoulder you see of his body, then just below the neck, here's the head. When you look at the neck, the shoulder section here, you can just about make out colored stripes. Can you see them along here? Now, if I just highlight them a little bit for you, you can see you have a collar in stripes, and then you have vertical stripes coming down in red and blue, or maybe blue, black, and white. This is a multicolored coat, a coat of many colors. This statue wore a coat of many colors. So when we restore the statues, look what it looked like basically. It looks something like this. So this is the statue of the man who was buried in that pyramid tomb, who lived in a palace in the land of Goshen, who was a Western Asiatic or Semite, who was a chief official of the land, who was given a pyramid by the Pharaoh to honor him. Now, there can't be many people in history that would match so well with somebody like Joseph and the stories in the Bible. So this is him in his multicolored coat with his titles down the front. I've restored this on the basis of what we know the statue would have looked like, carrying his throw stick with his red hair. And this is what would have been in the chapel, standing there throughout his the time between when he died and when Moses took the body out of the tomb and took it to the promised land at Exodus. So now we come to slavery, the next phase of this story. And this is where we introduce Moses himself. This is what the Egyptian evidence has to say for us. So let's just summarize where we are with the timeline. So we have the arrival of the Israelites in the late 12th dynasty, the time of Amenemhat III. And we have them leaving at the end of the 13th dynasty, leaving Egypt. So it's encompassed by this period we call the Middle Bronze 2A. So they arrive in the beginning of Middle Bronze 2A, and they leave at the end of Middle Bronze 2A, and then comes Middle Bronze 2B. And that matches exactly with the 13th dynasty in Egypt, a part of the 12th dynasty. Jericho was destroyed about 40 years later in the Middle Bronze 2B. So the sojourn period is that area you see there. That's the time when the Israelites were in Egypt, between the arrival and the departure. Now, we have more evidence than this. So when in the slavery period, we have documents from this period. This one in particular, Papyrus Brooklyn, actually is a slave list of about 90 people. When we delve into it and we look at it, it's in hieratic, by the way, not in hieroglyphs, we see some very interesting names. Now, how the formula goes in this list of servants or names, it goes like this. First of all, it names their Semitic name, the name that they were born with and given by their father and mother. Then it says, he who is called, then they give them an Egyptian name. That's the new name that the Egyptians give them. And then with the female, it would be she who is called, Egyptian name. Well, what are those names that we see with the Semitic names before you get the Egyptian names? Well, you have Asher, Issachar, Jacob, Menachem, Job, Shifra. Shifra was one of the midwives in the story of the culling of the male children, the male infants, by the Pharaoh. These names appear in this papyrus. It's dated to the reign of a king called Sobekotep III of the 13th dynasty. If we go in a bit closer, you can see I've highlighted in red the hieratic names, Menachem, Issachar, and Shifra and Asher, that appear on this fragment of the document. There's much more of it, which I'm not showing you. And there are many, many names here that you could call Hebrew. Now, we learn a little bit from outside the Bible now. There's a historian, a Jewish historian from Alexandria called Artaparnas, but his name actually tells us that he's actually from Persia, or at least his family was from Persia, because it's a Persian name. But he worked in the Alexandrian library, so he wrote a history of the Israelites. It's now lost to us, so we only have fragments of it mentioned by Josephus and other people. But the fragments are very important, and they tell us something about what happened to Moses in the time between when he was fished out of the river and when he led Egypt into the Exodus. He said that Moses was raised by a pharaoh called Ken-Ophres. Now, he's writing in Greek for his Ptolemaic masters, his 31st dynasty Ptolemies, who were living in Alexandria after Alexander the Great conquered the world. And he calls him Kenofres. Well, that's the Greek version of the name. Now, Egyptologists know immediately who this is, because that's the equivalent of Carnefere. Now, Carnefere is the way we Egyptologists pronounce these Egyptian names. It's not actually how they sounded, but it's the way we actually we use them when we're talking to each other. So Carnefere or Kenofres is the Greek version. That person is Carnefere Sobekotep IV, and he's the only king in the entire history of Egypt with that prenomen or coronation name. He was given the birth name Sobekotep, and when he was crowned, he was called Carnefere or Kenofres. He's the only one in Egyptian history with that name. So that immediately tells us that Artaparnas is telling us when Moses was raised as the Prince of Egypt. These are statues of this king. He was the most powerful pharaoh of the 13th dynasty. Not like many of them. Many of them have weakened, had short reigns. This guy was very, very powerful. So Carnefere Sobekotep IV is the pharaoh who raised Moses. He was the 29th ruler of the 13th dynasty. There were lots of rulers in this period. Some of them only reigned for 1 year or 2 years. They were very minor, but this guy was very, very important. This is a fragment now of something called the Royal Canon of Turin, which is a king list that was survived from the ancient Egyptian times, written on papyrus. It's now housed in the Turin Museum. And this is a little fragment of it. I just want to show you close up, because this is the list of the 4 kings that actually were the ones who enslaved the Egyptians. So we start with Sobekotep III, who had that papyrus in Brooklyn, which showed you the slave lists. He then had 3 sons. Neferhotep I, he was the eldest. Si-Hator, which was the next eldest. Now, he only reigned for about 6 months, so he doesn't really count. And then we have Sobekotep IV, who was the younger of the 3 sons, and he's the one that we're talking about, who was the big chief, who was the one that raised Moses. So now I want to quote you from Manetho. Now, Manetho was an Egyptian priest who was a historian. At the same time as Artaparnas, he was writing a history of Egypt when Artaparnas was writing a history of Israel and the Jews. So Manetho says this about this particular time period. He says, Ptolemaeus. Now, Ptolemaeus, he's referring to a king called Ptolemaeus. Again, that's a Greek version of the name. In his reign, for what cause I know not, a blast of God smote us. Now, the most important thing to realize here is that God is in the singular, not in the plural. This is an Egyptian priest writing in a country where they had hundreds of gods, and he refers to one God. And that God smote the Egyptians. What does that mean? Well, what follows tells you. And, the Greek word is kai. And so as a consequence of God smiting the Egyptians, unexpectedly from the regions of the east, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land. By main force, they easily seized it without striking a blow. They didn't have to fight. They just came into the country, and having overpowered the rulers of the land, they then burned our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with a cruel hostility, massacring some and leading into slavery the wives and children of others. These people were called the Hyksos, the marauders who came into Egypt after something terrible happened to the Egyptians. They came in, they took over the land, they killed a load of people, they executed the pharaohs. The pharaohs were driven. The pharaoh's family was driven south towards Luxor, Thebes, and they occupied the land of Goshen all the way down to Memphis. They conquered the northern part of Egypt. They then plundered the pyramids and the temples. They enslaved the females, who were then buried alongside them when they were buried in the ground. Now, when I showed you that little fragment of the Turin Papyrus, that's this bit at the bottom here. You can see with my arrow, hopefully, on the right-hand column, What I'm showing you now is a bigger fragment of this papyrus. It's actually about 10 feet long, so you're only showing a little bit here, but this is the bit that matters. And you see it's very fragmentary. There's whole chunks of it which we don't have anymore. But we can work out what's going on from the fragments we do have. So what we know is in this column here, which is column 6, we have the beginning of the dynasty we call dynasty 13 or the 13th dynasty. So this is the end of the 12th dynasty here, which is when Amenemhat and Joseph were ruling in the country. Then the dynasty 13 starts. And of course, Joseph lived for a long time. He didn't die until the middle of the 13th dynasty, around this time. He was then followed by the deaths of his brothers. And so when all of them had died, we get the slavery period, which starts down here with these pharaohs we saw in the fragment. So we got Sobekotep III, Neferhotep I, and Sobekotep IV. Now, if we go to the next column, column 7 here, we can continue with that list. So here's Sobekotep IV, the 29th king. We're now going to go to the top of the next column, and we go down 45 years. The number of years they ruled for is preserved here on the left-hand side, and we get down to this guy here, whose name is Dudimos. He's the 40th king of the dynasty. And Dudimos is the Egyptian version of the Greek name Tutimeus, which Manetho wrote about. So he is the pharaoh when God smote the Egyptians. Manetho's Greek rendering of Dudimos is Tutimeus. When we look at the archaeology at Avaris in the land of Goshen, which I showed you earlier on, at this time, at the end of stratum G, which is the occupation of the Israelite period, okay, suddenly the archaeologists find these pits in the ground all over the site, full of bodies which have been tossed in on top of each other. Look how this guy's lying on top with his leg on top of the guy underneath. This guy's flat on his back. This one's flat on his stomach. They've just been tossed into these pits. No grave goods, nothing like that at all. Something terrible happened at the end of stratum G. Here's some more pictures of the same thing. Look how this guy had been thrown in to the pit. Another one lying over here. No grave goods. Here's a third one. There are loads and loads of these pits in the ground. What is going on? Well, this is what we learn from the archaeology. At the end of stratum G, marking the close of the 13th dynasty, the end of the 13th dynasty, when Tutimeus was the king, when Dudimos was the king, the main tell area or mound area of Avaris was abruptly abandoned and the Semitic population vanished. They disappeared. We don't know what happened to them unless you happen to be reading your Bible. So now we have what the archaeologist himself said, Manfred Bitak says, in a technical report. This is very brief, but he explains it in more detail, but I'll just tell you what he says. In stratum G1, which is the last phase of G, that is the 13th dynasty phase, the Israelite phase, there is an abandonment of the settlement, emergency burials in shallow pits and graves. So in other words, this is the plague that we're talking about. What is that plague? An explanation other than the decision to construct a necropolis and sacred temenos must be considered in order to explain the complete abandonment of stratum G settlement. What he's talking about there is that afterwards, after a period of time, we don't know how long, the Hyksos came in and they built on part of this area, they built a huge temple to Baal, a necropolis there. But it's not the whole area. Because he goes on to say, because the different parts of the site were not simultaneously redeveloped after they had been vacated. In other words, the Semitic population of the 13th dynasty, which I showed you the archaeology for, suddenly disappeared after a plague of some kind hit the site where the people were thrown into the pits. The population then disappeared, vanished, and in comes the Hyksos peoples, and they come in later on and they persecute and conquer Egypt. So it's a case of now is whether or not you want me to go on, or we need to discuss that a little bit, or I can continue on. Just could you let me know, Barak?
Okay, yeah. I just want to touch bases for the people coming in, so everybody can understand what's going on.
Okay, you do that, and I'll pick up again afterwards.
Okay, so family, those who coming in late, the purpose of me doing this interview and this presentation with David Rohl is, one, the most important thing is the naysayers saying the Exodus never existed, right? So you got, if you've been around in the social medias and all around, a lot of people don't believe the Exodus actually existed at all. So that's the number one prior reason why I have them on here. Number two, you've guys heard people say America is the promised land, South Africa is the promised land, and all these other regions, that's the promised land. That's the number two reason why I brought them on here, to show historical artifacts and historical information, right? To prove that that is the land. And that's the stuff that we're hearing. People are that's never been into Egypt to even study these particular places, but yet and still they're teaching that America is the promised land, and also South Africa and other regions. So that's the main purpose that Mr. Rohl is on here. Like I told you, I've been watching him for over 9 years. I have his books. So also, I want to apologize to everybody that I send the improper email. Well, not improper email, the wrong email without the attachment when I asked a rhetorical question, who is David Rohl? I sent some people the information without sending them the attachment of his profile. So I want to apologize to everybody for that confusion. So that's where we at. My one question, David, before you you mentioned the scholars, the mainstream scholars, no, not the mainstream scholars, that you teach in Israelite culture, that we did not lay on our backs in the coffins, we laid on our sides.
Yeah.
Was that a gesture to laying towards the east?
That's a very interesting question. Not all of them are orientated in the same direction, okay, but some are certainly facing east, so that the head is looking towards the east from the Nile Delta, which would take you to the promised land. So that is a good point, but we can't say that every single body is laid that way.
Okay.
But don't forget also that not all Hebrews are Israelites.
I agree. We definitely know that. Yeah.
Israelites are the children of Jacob. Israel. Okay, but there are other Hebrews in this population. Okay, we call them the mixed multitude. Okay, they may not have been Israelites, and they may not have been buried looking towards the east.
Right. Okay. And now, one more quick question. You said Dunamis is the one that ruled over Egypt, that put us into slavery. Is that what you said?
No. That was Sobekotep III. Dudimos was the one who was the unfortunate pharaoh of the time of the Exodus. In other words, he was the one that suffered the plagues. He was the one that lost his eldest son.
So what does the mainstream scholars say who it was? Do they say the same person?
No, they say it's Ramesses II.
Rames, right? That's what I mean.
Which is complete nonsense, because Ramesses II was the most powerful pharaoh of the period. He never lost Egypt. There was no disasters in his time. There wasn't even a large population.
And the timeline is wrong, right? When he ruled, it couldn't have happened.
Yeah, but not the biblical timeline. The Egyptian timeline is wrong. The biblical timeline.
Okay, got you. All right, you can resume. Thank you for that.
Okay, all right. So let's move on to the departure now. So the Israelites leave the land of Goshen. They leave this city of Avaris in a huge column, heading where? Well, heading not on the road to the Philistines, because we know that was a dangerous road. So Exodus 13, 17, 20. And it came to pass that when Pharaoh had let the people go, again, Elohim this time, did not lead them by the road to the land of the Philistines, although it was near. Instead, Elohim led the people around by the road through the Midbar Yam Suf. After leaving Succoth, Cheku in Egyptian terms, they camped to Etham on the edge of the desert. Now, I'm going to take you through those places, okay? The first thing to remember is that they go through the desert, Midbar, or wilderness, of Yam Suf, which is actually the name of the sea which the Israelites cross. It's not the Red Sea, it's the Yam Suf. So let's go on that journey to the Red Sea. You start in Goshen. You go through the desert of Yam Suf. You end up at a place the Bible calls Succoth or Sukkot, which Egyptian is Cheku. You then arrive at a place called Etham, which Egyptian is Hetem, which means border fort. And then you go to a place called Pi-hahiroth, which I'm going to explain that term to you in a minute, which is beside the place called Yam Suf, or Yam Suf, not Red Sea. So let's look at that word first of all, Yam Suf. The Israelites did not cross the Red Sea, they crossed the Reed Sea, Hebrew Yam Suf, or Sea of Reeds. Okay, so Suf is actually a Hebrew word that they borrowed from the Egyptians, because the Egyptians called it Chuf, the reeds. Okay, and we actually know where that place was. But the most important thing is to know that Egyptian ch in Hebrew becomes s. So you get yam, not chuf, but suf. Yam suf means the sea of reeds. Now, where is it? Okay, well, let's follow the route from Avaris, which is in the land of Goshen. They cross this desert here, this triangular desert, which we call the Midbar Yam Suf. And they arrive at Tel El Maskuta, which is biblical Sukkoth. All scholars agree that this is the Sukkoth of the Bible, which is in the Wadi Chumalat, and it's quite near to Pithom, the other place that is mentioned in the Exodus story, which is at Tel El Retaba. So from there now, they're intending to head across the Sinai Desert. So they go up to the place between the lakes. There's a lake called Lake Timzah, and there's one called Yam Suf. And the place they come to is a place called Etham, which I mentioned to you is actually a border fort. Okay, and that's the point where God tells them to turn back. Why? Well, probably because there was a large contingent of Egyptian soldiers in that fort, and they didn't want to be confronted by these Egyptian soldiers. That was the route that the patriarchs always used to go out of Egypt and go into Egypt. So it actually leads to Hebron. So it's the way of Shur. So if you were coming from Hebron, like Abraham when he came into Egypt, you would go on this route into the Wadi Chumalat, you would cross the Midbar Yam Suf, and you would arrive at Avaris. And when Jacob's body was being taken out of Egypt when he died by Joseph, he would take him on this route. So Moses is using the route that he expected to use, because that was the one that the patriarchs always used. They didn't go to the way of the Philistines to the north, but God tells them to turn back. So Yah spoke to Moses and said, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and pitch camp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, to the east of Baal-zephon. You must pitch your camp opposite this place," which is Pi-hahiroth, "beside the sea." This is a crucial bit of text that tells us all the locations we need to pinpoint the exact place we need to be. So in Numbers 33:7, it says, "They left Etham, turned back to Pi-hahiroth, to the east of Baal-zephon." So this place called Baal-zephon is to the west of where the Israelites are going to be. And where the Israelites are going to be is a place called Pi-hahiroth. So from our stopping place, where they don't cross over, where they would expect to cross over at Etham, they actually turn back, and they have to follow a canal which was dug by the Pharaohs, which is called the Walls of the Ruler. It actually connects up the lakes, so that any foreigners that are coming into Egypt, they can't get across into Egypt, because this canal is not only wide, but it's full of crocodiles. So it's a very dangerous place. So the Egyptians call it the Walls of the Ruler, and it is actually the border of Egypt. To the east of that is not Egypt, to the west of that is Egypt. So the Israelites are still trying to get out of Egypt. So they follow the canal northwards until they get to this place here up at the top. Now, they're not on the way of the Philistines, but they are very close to it now. And God has done that on purpose. He's now wanted to give an example to the world that the Israelites and God are more powerful than the Egyptian army, which is why he's taken them up there. He now has to make an example of the Egyptian army. So the Israelites end up at the northern end of this thing called the Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds. It's a freshwater lake. That's why it's got reeds growing in it. You can't grow reeds in the sea, salt sea. So it's actually a water lake. They have no idea how deep it is. They haven't got a clue. They're just looking across, and it's a vast expanse. They can't go any further. They're trapped now on this peninsula of sand, and the Egyptian army is coming up behind them. So where is this Pi-hahiroth? Well, let's break that word down. Pi-hahiroth is three different words. Pi is the word mouth in Hebrew. Ha is the definite article, or the word the, and kiroth is the word for canals, plural. Now we have examples of that same word in Akkadian, which is the Mesopotamian language. There it's called Pi-Hiriti, the mouth of the canal. In Northwest Semitic, which includes Hebrew and Ugaritic and other languages, it's called Khara, the word for canal is Khara. And Papyrus Anastasi 3, which is an Egyptian document, this specific canal is called Pa-Khara, or the canal, and we know exactly where that was. So here is the area that we're going to be looking at now. Look at the local locations. Migdol, that was mentioned in the text. Baal-Zephon was mentioned in the text, and that is to the west of Pi-Hahiroth. And then you have Pashi Horeb here, which is an ancient lake, which actually is open to the sea. And then you have this canal, which flows from the Par Chufi, or the Par Suf, the Yam Suf, out towards the desert to an oasis. And that still existed until about 30 or 40 years ago. So in Exodus 14:21, Yah drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. So here now we're going to go into the miracle of the waters parting. Not in the Red Sea, but in the Yam Suf here, in the northern end of the lake. So let's bring in this east wind. It's coming across the flat desert of Shur. So it's a real howler. There's no mountains in the way to break it up. It's coming across this way. It's very, very strong. And it's blowing against the upper part of this Yam Suf area, which, as you can see, is shallower than the other parts. But the Israelites don't know that. They don't know how deep it is. They haven't got a clue. So we're now going to use computer modeling systems, right? So we're using computer programming, which is done by universities in America, which we're doing with what we called wind set down. The wind set down is when a wind blows across the surface of water and pushes the water back and divides it. Now, this model that I'm going to show you now is using a 62 miles per hour wind. Now, people who live in America will know that it's not a particularly difficult wind. You can stand up in that. You can walk. You have 62 mile per hour winds in the United States all the time and higher. But it does do remarkable things to water. So let's now go to the computer model. This is actually the screen of the computer. So here's our Yam Suf with the shallow area at the northern end. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's the desert of Shur, which is a flat desert. And you have the canal, the mouth of the canal, Pi-Hahiroth, opening out into the upper end of the Yam Suf. So the mouth of the canal, Pi-Hahiroth, is there. The Israelites, therefore, are on this peninsula here, with the Egyptian army coming up behind the peninsula here, trapping them. Now, let me just take some water. So what happens? Okay, well, let's set the computer in motion. We set the 62 mile per hour wind coming from the east. Let's say at 7 p.m. is when the whole process starts. So we know that the Israelites traveled at night across the Yam Suf. And then the Egyptian army came in the early hours of the morning to try and cross after them. So at 7 p.m., nothing's happening. The wind begins. By 10 p.m., this program has produced a complete parting of the water on two sides, pushed away on two sides, leaving dry ground between at 62 miles per hour. At 3 a.m., it's reached its maximum distance. So the two walls of water are at the furthest point at this point. The Israelites have now been crossing for several hours opposite Pi-Hahiroth onto the desert of Shur over here. So they're already getting across and they're doing really well, and most of them have already crossed over. So what happens then at dawn? At 8 a.m., the waters are starting to come back. The Egyptian army and its chariots are already in the bottom of the lake trying to cross when these waters are returning. And 6 minutes later, this is what happens. 6 minutes later, the water completely comes in. It crashes against the chariot forces. They are completely drowned in the river and they're all dead within 6 minutes. This is the scene that we're suggesting that would have happened. It's very similar to what you know from the Cecil B. DeMille movie, but it's not as high. There's no need for walls of water 2,500 feet tall, which is what some people argue for when you're talking about crossing this the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba between Nuweiba and Saudi Arabia. That depth there is 2,500 feet. That's not possible. Here is exactly the requirements produced by computer for killing and drowning the Egyptian army in the Sea of Reeds. The miracle is in the timing. The timing is the perfect thing here. God sent an east wind. That's the process by which the waters are parted. The timing allows the Israelites to cross over, and then God stops the wind, and the waters come crashing back and drown the Egyptian army, leaving the Egyptian civilization defenseless, which then allows the Hyksos to come in and take over the country without having to fight a war. So this is only a week after leaving Goshen. This is the last day of the festival of unleavened bread. So you have the exodus from Egypt, the death of the firstborn on the first night, and you have the death of the Egyptian army exactly 7 days later on the last day of unleavened bread. So the two events are interconnected. So I'll take you into the Sinai wilderness now, and I'll take you to Mount Horeb. So the journey to Mount Horeb. Now, I've undertaken 2 missions into the desert in 2001 and 2004, tracing the route, and I'll show you some of the details of that. We used a large fleet of 4x4s, which take us in there, and we're covering the area, looking for inscriptions and looking for evidence for the route, names of places on the route, etc. So the Israelites leave the desert of Shur, which is where they're standing after the disaster of the flooding of the Egyptian army, the drowning Egyptian army. They then have to travel for 3 days without water. So they travel mainly by night. And they travel through the desert of Shur, which they're standing in, into the desert of Etham, and then they eventually get further down where there is a water supply. In Exodus 15, 22, 23. Then Moses led Israel from the Yam Suf, journeying into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. They came to a place called Marah. So in Numbers 33, it's slightly different. They departed from opposite Ha-Hiroth, or the mouth of the canal, and passed through the midst of the sea into the desert, journeying 3 days into the wilderness of Etham now, Midbar Etham, and camped at Marah. So the difference slightly is the Exodus story talks about the desert of Shur, Numbers talks about the desert of Etham. Basically, they're starting with Shur and they go into Etham afterwards. And if you look at where we've got to so far, we've come down into Cheku from Goshen. We've gone northwards. We've crossed Pi-Hahiroth crossed the Sea of Reeds into the desert of Shur. So now we're in the area, and we're going to go south down to a place called Bir Marat today, Mara. It's 65 miles, and then you'll notice that after that they go to a place called Elim, which I'll show you shortly. Now, so they're going through the Midbar Shur, but then they pass through the Midbar Etham. And notice that that's opposite the place called Etham, which they'd already got to on the west side and had to divert around. And now they're coming on the east side, past the original place that they were supposed to be crossing. So 65 miles in 3 days is roughly 22 miles per day. And that's what we know from the Bedouin is about typical of what they can travel, especially if they travel by night. When they arrive at Marah, it's still there today. This is the place called Marah. Exodus 15, 23, 25. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. This is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to Yah, and Yah showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. The reason why Marah is bitter is because it's actually part of the Red Sea. There you can see the Red Sea line with the ships traveling along. So the water seeps through the desert from the Red Sea, and it contaminates the waters here, the spring waters, with salt, which makes it bitter. That's exactly the same. And that is the place that is called today Marah. It's exactly the same name as in the Bible. They then arrive at a place called Elim, and that Elim is described as being, and they camped at Elim where there were 12 springs of water and 70, i.e. palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. Well, we know that place. That place today is called Ayun Musa, with its 70 palms and 12 springs. The springs of these days are now actually dug as wells. They've no longer open springs. And here you can see one of the springs here, which would have originally filled that area with water. And this is the area which is called Elim in the Bible, where the Israelites probably stayed for around 2 weeks resting after all the exertions of what happened before. And then they traveled on through the desert. I'm going to cut out quite a few of the stops now, which we've managed to locate, and take you into the wilderness of Sinai, which is the last desert they come to before the mountain of God. In the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sinai. Departing from Rephidim, they reached the desert of Sinai and pitched camp there facing the mountain. So that is the desert of Sinai you can see in the distance there. It's a granite massif. It's a huge rocky area of Sinai. They passed through Rephidim, which is the Wadi Rephaid today, into this place called the Pass of the Wind, which is a little passageway that goes through the mountain chain into a place called Er Racha. Er Racha is a plain, a flat plain, which they come to, and then they come to the outskirts, as it were, of Jebel Musa on Mount Horeb. Let me show you that in more detail. They travel that's only 6 miles through that section. So this is the Pass of Wind. We're standing in the Pass of Wind, looking down into the plain towards a mountain called Ras Safsafa, which means the headland or the head of Safsafa. Yah answered Moses, in this case it's Yah or Yahuwah, not Elohim. Yah answered Moses, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you had struck the Nile with when he was in Egypt. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. So Moses is leading the elders to where he can find water, and he strikes the rock and it produces water, enabling the rest of the people to come into this area and camp there. So here's Moses and the elders entering this area. As I say, it's only a 6-mile walk from the main camp in Rephidim, and they're coming down into the plain. And they come in front of this huge mountain. After they had set out from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai, and Israel camped there in front of the mountain. So we have to have a mountain where they are camped. It can't be somewhere where they can't camp. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with Elohim, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. So they are standing outside the camp facing the mountain. When you climb Ras Safsafa and you look down onto the plain of Er Racha, you can see how big it is. It's a huge plain, easily comfortable enough to take a huge population of people. And it's for the population to be able to see the mountain. So the Israelite camp would have been at the foot of the mountain there. The Wadi Er Racha means the Valley of Rest. Why is it called that? Because the Israelites rested there for the best part of a year or half a year before they moved on to the Promised Land. So it's the place where they sojourned in the desert for many, many months. This is an old photograph of the plain there, and you can see it's semi-fertile in the sense there's brush around, so your animals could feed off it. And that's the great mountain. Over on the left-hand side here is St. Catherine's Monastery. So here's as it is pretty much today. And I'm just going to put the camp in for you again. So you can see the large camp has plenty of room to be able to settle here and to keep an eye on the mountain from there. Now, what's important is they have to have water. Is there abundant water in the area? Well, yes, there is. Look at this lake here. This is in Sinai, not very far from that camp. This is it in the summer months rather, after the water is partly evaporated. This is it in the winter. There's plenty of water here for people to drink for the entire period they're going to be there. In fact, there is water all over this area. Number 1 down here is the main one, the one that was struck by Moses at the rock. And that's right next to Raf Saf Safa here. But there are many others as well, all in this area where they could have collected water. And in the winter, this is how fertile the area is. So there's plenty of shrubbery, etc., for the animals to graze on to keep the animals alive. So you have water and you have grazing. And here you see again a photograph from 100 years ago with a shepherd looking after his flocks here in this Raqqa plain. And the spring that Moses struck, or the rock that struck, is here. The spring one is actually at the side of the mountain. Here's a photograph of it from, again, 100 years ago. This is the rock that is called the Rock of Horeb today, and it's been called that for many, many centuries. So Moses came into this area much earlier when he was in exile. When he came to look after Jethro's flocks, he brought them to this area where there is grazing, where there is water, at the foot of this mountain, which is the mountain where he first met God at the burning bush. The burning bush in this area, there are lots of bushes in this area. They do grow in this area because it's semi-fertile. So I want to finish really with an important point, but it's very controversial. And I want you to think about this, and maybe you would disagree with it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but this is my suggestion. Whenever you see the word God in the Old Testament, the original Hebrew was Elohim, okay? So if you read the Hebrew script, you get Elohim there, where we translate God. Wherever you see the word Lord in your translations, the Hebrew word is Yahuwah. Or if you're Jewish, Hashem, because they don't want to say the name. They just say the name. They don't actually say the name of God. But wherever you see Lord in your Bibles, it is actually written in Hebrew, Yahuwah. When God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, he says, Echye Asher Echye, which could, perhaps, and this is the perhaps, be read as Eya Asher Eya, because the hays that you see there, the H's, are vowel markers. Okay, in this period, they wrote vowel markers, all right, to indicate where vowels were. But if you go to the earlier Hebrew and the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, they don't have these vowel markers, so you have to take them out. And that would mean, in that case, it would mean, I am he who is called Eya. In other words, the short form of God's name would be Eya or Yah. The first Echya would be the first person, I am. So that means I am, he who is called Eya. Now, when Moses asked God, well, what shall I call you when I go to the people and tell them that you sent me? And God says, tell them that Eya sent you. Not I am sent you. Tell them that Eya sent you. YHWH is the causative verb form of Haya, to be, which translates as he who causes to be. The Hey at the end of Yah in our short form name, which is the name you see a lot in ancient texts, Yah could be a vowel marker. So that H could be a vowel marker, making God's original name simply Yah. But with a prosthetic aleph, which is something you find in the ancient world, where they add an aleph at the beginning of the word, you would get Eya. Ea was the god who in ancient Mesopotamia, the Genesis period of Mesopotamia, the very early patriarchs, the time of the flood, etc., Ea was the god who created humankind in all the Mesopotamian text and saved us all by telling the Mesopotamian flood hero to build an ark. So is that Ea Yah of the biblical text of the time of Moses? That's the question I'm interested in following up. So there's the Tetragrammaton. Reading from right to left, you have Yod He Wav He. Yahweh or Jehovah is the way that some people pronounce that name, but I'm very pleased to note with your group, you don't pronounce it that way at all. You pronounce it the way I do. Yahuwah. I hope that's how you pronounce it anyway. And that is basically a name form of name called Yah, and Hua, which is an epithet, which means makes to exist. So Yah makes to exist is the full title, but his original name is simply Yah. The name of God gave to Moses at the burning bush may simply have been Ea or Yah, and that is the same God that we see in Genesis, that we see in the Mesopotamian inscriptions. The Mesopotamian inscriptions tell us about the stories of creation and the existence of Ea, the God who made mankind, who created mankind, saved the flood hero from the flood, etc., etc. Is that a connection back to the early patriarchs? That's the question I would like to think we might be able to discuss. So that's it. So we can go back now, I think, to a little chat.
All right. I don't know if I heard you. I was checking something out real quick. Mount Sinai. Where do you say Mount Sinai is?
I'm just going to stop screen first to make sure
Okay.
It's gone now. Yes?
So yeah,
say that again.
My question is Mount Sinai. Where do you say that's at?
Well, Sinai is possibly, there are three names, aren't there? There's Horeb, there's Sinai, and there's the Mountain of God. Those three names are used for this area. I think Sinai is the actual wilderness of Sinai. In other words, it's all those granite mountains that you see at the southern end of Sinai. There happens to be a mountain right next to Ras Safsafa, which is called Jebel Sina. Okay, but Ras Safsafa is the let me think of this right, is the northern ridge of Jebel Musa, which is the mountain that everybody climbs today to go and witness the sunrise. So Jebel Musa could be Mount Sinai, but Ras Safsafa is the northern extension of it. So it's all one mountain. So it actually looks down on the plain. So although the people were looking at Ras Safsafa, Moses would have gone to the back of the mountain, to the highest point, which is Jebel Musa, and that would be where he would have received the commandments.
So that wouldn't be. Is that a different area? Because I'm thinking, me and a brother of mine, and a brother of mine is pretty good with these maps. We were thinking it was Agaba. So would that be the Gulf of Agaba area?
Aqaba. No, you're talking
Aqaba.
About this idea that you cross the Gulf of Aqaba from Nuweiba to Arabia, and that the mountain of God is in Arabia. I don't follow that at all. The depth of the water at Aqaba, the Gulf of Aqaba, where Nuweiba is 2,500 feet deep. I've actually measured it on a cruise ship, okay, with a sonar used by the captain of the ship to measure the depth of the water at the point where the so-called bridge is between Sinai and Arabia, and it's 2,500 feet, which is twice the height of the Empire State Building.
All right, so you're saying that's I'm just trying to get your point of view. So you're saying that couldn't have happened because of the depth of the water?
The depth of the water, because you have to ask yourself, what mechanism did God use to part the water? The biblical text tells you it's a strong east wind. It's not magic and other things. God is in control of nature. In this particular period, he controls everything in nature. The winds, the earthquakes, all those things are in the control of God. And he is using the wind to part the water. You cannot part 2,500 foot of water with an east wind. You would be blown off the planet if the wind was that strong. It would have to be hundreds and hundreds, 1,000 miles an hour. The wind would have to be to do that.
Well, they said God is he can do all things, but I get you.
All right, it's fair enough to say that, but you also have to read the Bible, and if the Bible tells you something, you have to believe it.
We definitely stand on the scriptures. Yeah.
God sent a strong east wind to part the waters. Yeah,
that's what the scriptures say. Yeah, that's what it says.
It doesn't say anything else. It says that.
Yeah, it does say that. Yeah. Also, so that particular area you're talking about, was a lake, not a sea. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying, it's a yam. No, there are other yams in the Bible. The Dead Sea is a yam. The Sea of Galilee is a yam, but they're not oceans. They're not seas. They are lakes.
Right.
Okay. So the word yam in Hebrew means body of water.
It
doesn't just mean sea.
Right. that's true. Different translations. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. All right. Well, that was great. We can move forward and go to the next
Nope,
presentation.
that was it. I finished
Oh,
there. I managed to
oh,
get it all in one go.
oh.
Sorry.
Okay. I thought you said you had one more. I'm sorry. So, good. All praises for that. But let's see. We got let me see my time period here. We started 11, 12. Yeah, so we got like 20 minutes, I think, right? This
Well,
is
that's
20
good.
minutes.
That's
Yeah.
good.
So first of all, thank you again for the well presentation. And family, I just wanted y'all to know that was my main purpose. What I said earlier, anybody coming in late, my main purpose to this, even if we disagree with certain little regions or whatever the case may be, is that I believe wholeheartedly the Exodus existed. And that was what a lot of people are teaching. And then number 2 or 3, people, again, like I said, is saying that America is the promised land or South Africa. And I disagree with those analogies as well. So my question to you, because I do want you to know, our ministry is not about a race thing.
Right.
We have mixed multitudes of people that fellowship with us as well.
Right.
So we're not big on that, whether this or that, but we do know that there's been some history distorted as lying as far as who we were, and who were we coming on the slave ships. And so my question to you, I know that's not your field, but my question to you, because you've been over there in Egypt, and I've heard and read studies where they found the Lakish findings in certain skulls, and I've read where some of them, a lot of them were melanated skulls of people of color. And so I wanted to ask, did you find anything of that in your research over there at all?
Okay. Well, the first thing to know is that I'm not an anthropologist. I'm an
Right.
archaeologist.
Right.
So I dig, but I don't study bones.
Right.
But it's quite obvious that there are periods in Egyptian history where the pharaohs were not white, were not yellow, they were black. No doubt. Not all the time, I have to say that, but some of the time. In the ancient world, there was always intermarriage going on between one civilization and another civilization. So sometimes the skin color, etc., changed through marriage, etc. So you can't say that all the time they were sub-Saharan. There would have been Africans from North Sahara as well. So there's no doubt at all that there's Egyptians and there are sub-Saharan Egyptians, without any doubt. There seems to be some Mesopotamian influence as well. So there's archaeological evidence for Mesopotamian influence in the early period, in the early dynastic period. So yeah, I don't have an issue with that at all, as far as I'm concerned. What is important to me is that we keep an open mind about these things. That we know what the biblical text says. We know what the archaeology tells us. So, for instance, looking at that statue in the pyramid tomb at Avaris of an Asiatic wearing a multicolored coat, his skin color is yellow. Okay, that's undeniable. That means that if that is Joseph would have come from a tribe from the north as opposed to from the south. But that doesn't mean that there's not intermarriage there. For instance, Moses married a Cushite woman, a woman from Ethiopia, from Cush. Therefore, there's intermarriage going on all the time, as far as I know. And there's no reason the 25th dynasty in Egypt was entirely Cushite. It was entirely black. So there's no issue there either. So it fluxes, between different colors at different times. Just like in Britain, for argument's sake, we've had all sorts of different dynasties of different nations, ruling our country. The elites are not always the same as the indigenous people. They are sometimes a superstrata, and the substrata is your population, and they can often be different.
All praises for that. Also, in a documentary, and if you guys haven't seen Patterns of Evidence, I suggest you guys go get that. It's like 6 or 7 parts to it, DVDs. very informative information. In that video, I believe, I don't know if it was you or, because we had Doug Petrovich on too. I know you know Doug.
I know Doug. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
noticed that. Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
We had Doug. We interviewed Doug about 8 months ago, something like
Right.
that, dealing with his book on the world's oldest alphabet.
Yeah.
For y'all who don't know, family, he's on our playlist as well. Doug Petrovich, he's in that documentary as well with David Rohl here, Patterns of Evidence. But I wanted to ask, was that you or him or somebody else that showed the Hebrew Israelites' houses and how they were different, built from the Egyptian houses?
That's a different question. I thought you were going to talk about the inscriptions in Sinai, which are Hebrew, which he did in his book.
Right.
But okay,
right.
we'll deal with both of those.
Okay.
The first thing is that the Egyptian style house that we see at Avaris, the very first one to be built there by somebody coming in from the north, is in fact a Syrian style house. It's exactly the same as the later four-roomed house that we see in Israel. So whoever comes into Egypt from the north, he brings that house architecture with him. Now that would be Jacob, who Joseph invites to come in, and that is the first house to be built there. And then after that, there's about 12 other houses around there scattered about, which would be the sons of Jacob. They're tribal leaders. So, and that expands into that massive city later on. So the very first things we see is actually what the Austrians call a Mittelsaal house, which is a house with a courtyard in the center. And that's what evolves into the four-roomed house we see in Israel. So yes, that comes from the north. But that is a different question to the one that Doug Petrovich was talking about, and which actually helps you, I think, with the root of the Exodus. And that is the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, or the early alphabetic inscriptions in Sinai, in Western Sinai. Now, if you are going to take the Israelites across the Gulf of Aqaba into Arabia, then you bypass those inscriptions. They don't belong anymore to the time of Moses, because they are on a different part of Sinai. You would skirt around them completely, which is evidence actually that the real route is the one I just gave you, because that is on the route. At Serabit el Kardim is where these Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions are found, and we know them to be Hebrew now, and they're amazing. Not Doug Petrovich's translations, but Rabbi Michael Baron's translations, which are actually amazing, because they talk about things like manna. Do as your father tells you with regard to manna, is one inscription. Another one says, I removed you, or I uprooted you from a persecuted garden. That is Moses saying, I took you out of Egypt where you were slaves. So these texts actually are part of the Exodus story, and they're found on the route I've just described to you, going down into the lower part of the Sinai Peninsula. They don't go into Arabia. They don't cross a 2,500 foot sea. None of that makes any sense at all. It only makes sense if you go into the Sinai Peninsula and you follow the route that is shown by the toponyms, the names that we have, which are exactly the same as the names in the Bible for those locations.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? I don't want to hog up. We got them for a few more minutes, family. 10 to 15 minutes. If we got any questions, put them in and I'll get them posted. Ben Ayah, you have any questions? Like I said, his main specialty is dealing with Egypt and the history of the Exodus and things like that. So if you got any questions, please ask. While we're waiting, my next question would be what was that? Something that I wrote down. I think I missed. You had mentioned the custom. Well, not the customs. I think you had. I'm trying to word it the right way. You had mentioned something in reference to how the distinction of the certain things that were found of it that was Israelites things versus. How did you come up with the distinction with that?
Oh, it's very obvious. We've excavated thousands and thousands of Egyptian graves. We know exactly how they're laid out in the graves. We know what things they put in the graves. Okay. They never lie on their side. They have Egyptian pottery and Egyptian artifacts. These burials in Avaris do not lay on their side. Sorry, do not lay on their backs. They lay on their sides. This is something we find in Israel and in Syria, all over the north. We find that type of Semitic burial, and the pottery that was found in the graves is also from Canaan. So we know very well that those are not burials of Egyptians; they're burials of Semitic peoples from the north. There's no doubt about that, and nobody would disagree with that. No archaeologist would disagree with that. One thing I'd like to ask you is, you refer to God as Yahuwah. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, I pronounce it Yah, just Yah. But I did used to use the pronunciation of Yahweh.
Yeah.
So it would be somewhat similar to Yahuwah. Some people say Yahweh, but in our ministry we say Yahweh or Yah.
Okay, yeah, well, that's perfect, because Yah, I think, is the original short name.
Yes, that's
And
on the manuscript.
And Yahuwah or Yahuwah, it's no problem. That's the same
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But if you break it down into God and as epithet, it means Yah, who makes to exist, who creates everything. He creates the world. He creates the universe.
Yes.
And that, I think, is what it is. And I think his original name was Yah. I think it was simply that.
That's what I believe too. I believe
Good.
that too. I'm actually taking biblical Hebrew and conversational Hebrew. So, and that's what I came up to that is Yah. And
I don't see where Yahweh comes from. I just don't see it.
We don't either. We don't either. I think it's somewhat pagan and came in later.
It's academic. The typical academics. Yahweh. It's nowhere that all the names of kings and individuals in the Bible, they don't call the end of the names Jedediah. They don't say Jedediyahu. All these names are the same. Amaziah. They all say Yahoo. They don't say Yahweh. So it's much better to say Yahuwah and Yahshua as well.
Yeah.
The same. Yeah. Yah saves. The God Yah saves.
That's right. That's right. So got a question here. It says, so were you on path studying Egyptians that you learned about the Israelites when studying Egyptians? Did you start with the Bible or another source?
That's a good question. No, I started as an Egyptologist, as I said, right as a young boy, and I always thought the Bible was a fantastic book of history. I always believed that. So I was studying it from a point of view of archaeology, and I always puzzled, why was it that nobody managed to find any corroborative evidence of the biblical text in archaeology? And that just fascinated me. But my original study was Egyptian chronology. That's what I studied. And I only mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that I've written about and I have a huge number of followers about and people studying it today is something called the new chronology, which shortens the Egyptian history, which makes it then synchronized with the biblical narrative, the biblical stories. And so I'm a specialist in something called third intermediate period chronology, which is a period when we're going to shorten it down to a much shorter length of time, which lowers all the earlier dates down and makes everybody sync up beautifully with the Bible. And that's why we've discovered all this evidence now of biblical archaeology, because we've been looking in the right, not only the right places, but also the right time for the Israelites as well.
All right. So earlier the guy talked to me and, I had told him, I remember I told you, you said you're agnostic in the right way. So people want to know exactly, are you a believer or not? Because, my position, like I told you when I seen you a few years ago, I thought you were a non-believer, period. So people, they're just curious because you believe the Exodus existed.
No, that's a shame, really, because a non-believer is an atheist. I'm not an atheist. Okay, I'm an agnostic, and if you understand that word, it has different levels. Okay, so what I am is I am a traveling historian, learning about how to approach the Bible and theology. Okay, I'm very happy with the archaeology. I'm proving that historically speaking, the Israelites existed. The stories existed. They're not a pious myth, a foundation myth. They're much more than that. So I am traveling a road. I'm on that journey towards something. I don't know what it is at the end of that road. And it's a stony road. There's rocky bits in that road that I have to negotiate around. But by no means am I a non-believer. I've never been a non-believer. Okay. The question is how I understand the theological elements of the biblical story, how I get over the problematic parts of the Old Testament story. I'm 100% Jesus. I'm 100% Jesus. A brilliant individual, wonderful teachings, fantastic. With the Old Testament, I worry about things like the conquest narratives, the number of people who were killed and slaughtered in order for the Israelites to occupy the promised land. Those sorts of things worry me as a historian, but I am a true believer in the teachings of Jesus, without a shadow of a doubt.
All praises to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. That's good. Corn, C. Baron, I don't. Maybe you need to rephrase your question, or maybe he did answer this time. So maybe I'm confused. C. Baron. All right. So next question is, can you give us a few unknown facts about Hebrew customs that you have picked up through your research, like being buried on our side?
Whoa.
Great question, man.
That's tricky.
That's a great question too.
It is a great question. We're talking about a period of several thousand years. Okay, so things change, customs change. If you look at modern Judaism, it's very different to what I would call early Israelite. You got to remember that the Israelite. Some people refer to the Israelites in the time of the Old Testament as the Jews. That's not what they are. They're the Israelites, okay? The Jews are people from the tribe of Judah in the time when the Romans occupied Judea, okay? So the word Jew doesn't come from the Old Testament. You are Israelites. They belong to the sons of Israel, okay? So the customs then aren't entirely the same as Judaism today. Many of them are, and we do follow Pesach. We follow Passover. We celebrate those things. So there are customary changes. My personal belief is the teachings of Jesus are not entirely consistent with what we find in the Old Testament. They move on. They move on to something better, as far as I'm concerned. The teachings of Jesus are something so perfect, so wonderful, and they are not the same as in that time period, in that history, as the time of Moses. Moses had to use God. God had to be used in a different way in the time of Moses and Joshua than he did in the time of Jesus.
All right, C. Barrett. Yeah, I guess we got your question answered. I was confused. I'm sorry, but yeah, definitely, he answered it perfectly. That's good. That's good. I thought we got sidetracked and confused about your question. I'm glad he got it answered. Let's see. Anybody else? Let's see. Yeah, people are thanking you for coming on.
That's good.
Thanks. They definitely appreciated the visual presentation. And definitely, yeah, Yah's definitely doing the work through David. Yes, he is. To provide this information. So many people that's teaching that. What do you say to the fact that people's saying America's the Holy Land and South Africa? What do you say to that?
Well, you're talking to a Brit here, somebody from Britain. You know what the English are like. I'm not happy with America as it is at the moment. I don't think it's the promised land anymore. It had the promise. The promise was there, but then it took a turn for the wrong way, in the wrong direction, and it happened a long time ago.
No, I'm saying they're saying America. Excuse me, not to cut you off. They're saying America or South Africa is the real Israel, and Israel's not the land. That's what I'm saying.
No, that doesn't make any sense at all. The geography of the biblical text, the toponyms, the names of places, the features, everything are there in the Middle East. They're not in America. They're not in South Africa. The Dead Sea is in Israel, okay? The Jordan Valley is in Israel. Jericho is in Israel. We know it is. Okay. So the Sea of Galilee is in Israel. Goshen is in northeastern Egypt. The desert of Shur is in northern Sinai. You know, you can't start shifting all those things across into a different continent. And I don't see why we'd need to do that. Why would we need to do that? The Bible is for everybody. It's not just for people who live in a particular part of this world of ours. It's for everybody. We are all the promised land, but we have to behave like it's promised.
Yeah, I just had to ask that just to get it on record because a lot of people are teaching that. As a matter of fact, you had a conversation with a gentleman back and forth. I had on here. He's a good, well, he's not a good friend of mine, but I met him personally. Ron Dalton, when he pushes that Africa. I think you had some interchangeable with him on a platform a couple of years ago.
Right.
Yes, but anyway, he's teaching that in South Africa, which I respectfully disagree. But anybody else? Go ahead, David.
So all I'm saying is that, you know, our world is a pretty small place in this universe of ours, and we have to treasure it, and we have to treasure all the people on this planet because they all are worthy. Okay, and you know, if there is a higher being, which I'm sure most of your audiences will agree, he treasures this planet. We need to look after it, and we need to look after the people on this planet.
All right, we got another question here. I saw something last night on Reddit that sleeping on the back is most common cause for sleep paralysis. Did he uncover any of that during research, such as beliefs?
To be honest with you, when you're dead, it doesn't matter whether you're on the back or on your side. It's not going to make a lot of difference to you. So no, I mean, the idea of the semi-fetal burial is that you're going back to Mother Earth, that you are the baby, you've lived your life, you're going back, and you are therefore in the womb of Mother Earth, which is why you're in semi-fetal position. Whereas the Egyptians, they believed in mummification, and therefore their bodies were preserved in order to have an afterlife in the body. Okay, so that's why they are not on their semi-fetal position. They don't have the same philosophy. Whereas the Semitic religions always believed that you are returning earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You return to earth. That is the whole point. You're returning to the Mother Earth that God created, that you were born from.
All right. So the other question the gentleman wanted to know, who do you fellowship with? You mentioned you're Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Catholic, Brother Darnell.
As in many Catholics, I was a lapsed Catholic. There are a lot of lapsed Catholics. Okay, I was a Catholic until about the age of 15, okay. And then I drifted away. And then I'm because my wife's a Catholic. I do go to church every Sunday. I love the rituals of it all. I like all the rituals. I love the music. I think sacred music is fantastic and wonderful. Gospel choirs are absolutely wonderful. So, you know, what's one thing that makes me think there is a God? Because we create the most beautiful music that's ever possible to make. Some of it, anyway. Some of it's rubbish, but music is a gift from God, and that's my other sideline. I'm also a record producer. I write music for films. I've sold millions of copies of records over my time. I used to work with the Beatles as a tape op when I was a young man. I've produced lots of different albums for people, so I've also had that career as well. So I've got the ancient Egypt and biblical archaeology on one side, and I've got my music on the other side. And what a happy bunny I am!
All praises for that. And my last question is before we let you go, David. The museums. What museum would you say has the most Hebrew Israelite artifacts? I've heard the British Museum.
Israelite artifacts.
Yes, Hebrew Israelite artifacts.
No, certainly wouldn't be the British Museum or the Metropolitan. The one with the most archaeological artifacts that relate to Israel is the one in Israel, which is the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
Okay, yeah. So I messed that up. I meant outside of Israel, because I do know outside of Israel. That's what I meant to say.
Well, don't forget that I'm an Egyptologist, so I'm likely to favor the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is the new museum that's been built just outside Cairo near Giza, which is the biggest museum in the world with the biggest collection of Egyptian artifacts, including the entire Tutankhamun collection, thousands of statues. You could spend weeks in there and still find new stuff. And that is the most amazing museum. And if you ever get a chance to travel to Egypt, that's the first place you should go.
Okay. And so you mentioned Giza. Is that the area where the Giza calendar was found?
The Geza calendar you're talking about.
Oh, that's different. Okay.
That's Geza. That's the city of Geza in Israel.
Israel, right. I was about to say that, yeah.
No, Giza, Giza, is where the Great Pyramid is located. The Pyramid of Khufu. That's Giza just outside Cairo. But Geza is the city of Geza, which is just to the west of Jerusalem in the hill country area.
Yeah, I've read that. I looked at it. I thought you were pronouncing the Giza when you first said that. Okay, so we got two last questions here, family. We're gonna take. What was the books you were using earlier? I think one was the Book of Joseph in the presentations.
There's the book of Josephus, who was the history. He's the Jewish historian who wrote the time of the Romans' occupation of Israel or Judea. What I was talking about was Artaparnus. Now, Artaparnus was a Jewish historian, but unfortunately, his manuscript was destroyed in the fire of Alexandria when they burnt the library. But we do have fragments of quotations from people like Josephus of Artaparnus. So we get most of our Artaparnus from Josephus when he quotes him. So there's him, and there's Manetho, who has written a history of Egypt, but we only have redactions, what we call lists of pharaohs with their reigns, lengths, etc. Now that is available online. You can look at Manetho and you can look at the kings of Egypt there in that. But again, that's in Greek, because it was the same time as the Alexandrian library. So you have to translate the names into ancient Egyptian to really work out who's who. But I use it all the time to work out the reign lengths of different kings and who reigned after who.
All right. So somebody's asking, do you believe Joseph's father had red hair?
Joseph's father, we don't have his body, so I don't know.
Right.
To be honest, we do know that one of Esau had red hair. Remember Esau?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The names of the area into the east of the Jordan are named after him. So you've got and Midian, places like that. So we do have red hairs in the family of the patriarchs. That's pretty sure we do. So, but not all of them would have been red-headed. Like, we can have families with dark hair and blonde hair. In your case, brown hair, black hair. So, it depends on the strains and who marries who. But yes, there is Esau in the Bible who was red-headed. You still there?
Yes. Do you believe the Bible as a religious book, or what?
A book to his chosen,
or a book to the chosen to enlighten other nations?
Okay, the Bible is two things. It is a historical book with a framework of history and chronology, which gives you the timeline of the events of the Bible. But superimposed upon that is the theology of the Bible, the teachings of the prophets, the teachings of Moses, the teachings of Jesus, etc. So the Bible has two aspects to it. There's a historical side and there is a religious side. Now, I'm a historian. I study the historical side. I'm not a theologian. Therefore, I can't preach about theology. I have my own belief systems, but I don't wish to impress upon other people my belief system. What I can do is give you the historical framework upon which you fix your theology, your belief system. Okay, and by giving you a real history, I reinforce, I hope, your belief in the theological side, because I give you the historical framework which fits with the theology.
Absolutely, David. I'm sorry. Absolutely. Definitely. Thank you, man. This has been a blessing. You really showed a lot of informative information. If people don't believe that the Exodus existed, that is my main purpose of this interview. If you don't believe the Exodus existed, shame on you, and that's something that you have to deal with. Go do your own research, go over to Egypt, and maybe you can come back and do your studies and do a presentation on us and tell us how it didn't exist. This goes for the naysayers out here saying that it never existed. So again, Mr. Rohl, we thank you for coming. You have a blessed day. We wish you best of health, that you get better. You look good, and we will continue to pray for you, all right?
Thank you very much.
And you take care.
It's been great fun. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. I'll email you in the morning, okay? All right. Blessings. All right, family, before I go, I just wanted to close and sum up everything for some of the people who don't really understand what this presentation was about. Mr. Rohl did an awesome job. The main thing that I do, if y'all haven't looked at my playlist, I suggest you look at my playlist, how I do things, because I think some people are new, so they misunderstand me when I do these interviews. They think, that I agree with everything or whatever the case may be. I have a lot of interviews, family, with scholars on different types of topics, right? And we have to understand certain people come on, they have specialties, right? And I'm just trying to teach right now identity, language, and culture. This aspect was dealing with, he's an Egyptologist. He's not a Hebrew Israelite scholar. He's an Egyptologist. Now, whether his religious beliefs or whatever the case may be, the Torah teaches us only we can teach each other about the scriptures. So I brought him on here specifically for the Exodus. Did it exist? This, like Brother Darnell made a great point, family. We have to eat the meat and spit out the bones. There's some things that I disagree with, but that's not the angle I was coming from. This was a learning experience to show two key things, family, I need y'all to meditate on. These people with these websites that ain't never stepped into Egypt, going around teaching that America's the promised land. South Africa's the promised land. That's the second thing. More importantly, there's people going around teaching that the Exodus never existed. It's a bunch of garbage. It never existed. That's why I brought him on here, to show archaeological facts lined up with scripture. And he did line up with scriptures on things. But there's some things I disagree with, but that's not even my purpose. Just like the linguistic scholars I brought on here about the Hebrew. I ain't even talking about Zion Lex. I'm talking about people that was over there in the caves looking at the Hebrew scriptures and all that. This is the stuff that I be doing. I brought a Hebrew scholar on here, to the prophet. If you missed that, those are the questions you need to ask that about. Go look at those videos. He lived in Africa with our ancestors, our people. So if you go through our playlist, you'll find different aspects of culture. That's how I try to base everything. And again, we're gonna have our differences, family. We this and that, but eat the meat and spit out the bones. All right. One thing I can say for sure, the man been over there doing research. And one thing I can say for sure, the Exodus existed. And the second thing I can say stand on is Israel is the promised land. Anything else, everybody can debate about that. Oh, was it this or wasn't that? That is why I brought him on here, family. So if you learned something, one thing we can all stand on, and I'll debate anybody about this live, that the Exodus did exist and that Israel is the promised land. That was my purpose of this interview and this presentation. Anything else, we can argue amongst each other and it's okay. Yes, me and K Judah has the DVDs. If y'all haven't seen them, all the stuff that's on Tubi, everything is not on. The whole DVD breakdown is not on Tubi. just to let y'all know, you have to purchase these DVDs. It's, what is it, 7K, Judah? 7 parts, I believe. I can't remember. And the Moses controversy, family, this ain't even David Rohl. This is a bunch of different scholars. I only had 2 from the DVD that's been on here. David, Doug Petrovich, and David Rohl. There's a whole lot more of the scholars on that DVD. And what I thank y'all about this is they over there in the land. Nunya B pointed out something very, very good. And if y'all read Judah Parfum's book, he said something on here. The same thing Darnell said. Nunya B said. Some of these scholars can't say certain things because they're getting paid money, so they have to be quiet. And y'all have to understand that. Some of them know who we are, but they can't say nothing because it's been being backed financially and all that. Then people will shut you down for that. So you have to be careful. That's why I respect Judah Parfum. He does not compromise. If you've seen my 2 interviews with him and anyone else, he's always the same. He's saying the same thing. The original people was us. I got him on record saying it twice. And y'all, if y'all ain't seen the interviews, go back and look. This is a man that been over there in Africa living, not faking over here doing his research. So again, we have to be mindful when these scholars come on and we start asking them. So some of them, that's not their field. They don't know. They just be adding conjecture. But if you want to know about who we are and people that studied us, keep paying attention. I got 2 more scholars coming on that went and lived with us. I got people coming on. This is going to be a little while, family, but I got people coming on. I'm praying that we get Rudolph Windsor. Rudolph Windsor. But yeah, definitely trying to just get the information out to my family. This is what we definitely big on over here: identity, language, and culture, and that's what we big on. And if you haven't seen the videos, go back and look at these videos. If you want to see sources, if you want to see our people, I brought Remy Aolo on here. I brought the elder from Africa on here, the Igbos. I brought the Yoruba brother Daniel Fearson on here. Go look at some of the people that know who we are. Look at some of the information that can show who we are. We just point out different angles, family. So I just don't want y'all to get off track because some things he said we probably don't agree with, this and that. That I just want y'all to know Barak brought him on there for these 2 main purposes, and we can't. Nobody in here dispute that. Nobody, and nobody outside can dispute that. And those are those 2 things. So thank everybody for coming. We will be back on. We're going to take a break. We'll be back on at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. We'll be in the Book of Acts, family. Again, y'all know what that's about. The Book of Acts is to help us study and be able to explain and articulate to our family members in Christianity that the law is not done away with. And we're going to be in Acts chapter 16, 17, and 18 at 3 p.m. Also, if I get the witnesses tonight for the new moon, I'll be blowing the trumpet tonight. I made the link for 9 p.m. if anybody's up. And if I don't get the witnesses for the new moon, I will not go live with it. I'll just put it in the community post. It's been is being canceled. And then whenever I see the witnesses for the new moon, I'll put it in on Facebook in our group page on Facebook, and I'll put it live on our community post, family. So again, if I offended anybody, that's not my intention at all. And I hope that I wasn't rude or nothing, but the questions or any of that. And I'm sorry if I forgot anybody. Sometimes when we say stuff, we might misunderstand each other. Typing is, when we talking is different than texting, I would say. But I hope everybody enjoyed this. And if you haven't watched it all, I behoove you to go back and look at some of this information. Definitely, eat the fruit and spit out the pits. That's right. Because me and K. Judah, actually, we was texting. We kind of think with the same thing, the Agaba thing, So, hey, one thing about it is we all here to learn and grow, and we're gonna have some disagreements. Me and K Judah was on one accord with that thing there, and if y'all haven't seen, K Judah did a nice breakdown of the Sea of Reeves and all that. So again, family, I love y'all like my brother K Judah say, with a pure heart. I hope and pray that everybody learned some things out of here. And I hope and pray that we can use some of these things to show people that, hey, you talking about Israel ain't the land. Well, remember, y'all, we walked over in Egypt, and we was over there. We lived over there too before we got enslaved. So y'all got to keep that in mind, man. These people be teaching these false doctrines, talking about this ain't the promised land, Israel. All the people from Africa, the Igbos I born on here, the Yorubas on here, got oral traditions of them leaving from Israel, going into different regions. Even the Limba, who is in South Africa, family, and I'm going to get one of them on here. I got to talk to Tudor. I'm going to get one of them on here, a top priest on here, one of the Limba, where they oral traditions. When Tudor Prophet came on here and did their oral traditions, he did their migration patterns on this channel live. They got an oral tradition for thousands of years how they left Israel and got to South Africa. And so they'll tell you, this South Africa ain't the land. Israel's our land. These is Limbas that been doing this they ain't just wake up to this truth. They've been following this way through their families, their mothers, their fathers, their kids. That's all they know. So keep that in mind. That's right, Brother Donnell, I walk. Facts. More than all this is we can quote this and quote that, but our walk is more important than anything. So thank everybody for coming. We're going to take a break. Everybody, if everybody's able to make it, we'll be back on 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Then y'all and myself will be going over Acts thoroughly, and I'll bring you pads and pens, and so we can point out and expose some things that is going on in Acts, but these salvational things and the laws done away with, and just a whole bunch of different things that's going to be pointed out. Some of y'all know already, some of y'all don't know. And so we'll see y'all then at 3 p.m. Everybody have a blessed Shabbat, and we'll see y'all in a little bit. Shabbat Shalom.
Y'all the main ones I'm watching on my throne. Created everything, but I called you my own. That land I gave you, put my name on it, my home. Yeah, that's my home. Israel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I made a promise, can't nobody take it. I chose to put you above all the nations. Out of your graves, I chose to awaken. We made a covenant, don't you forsake it. Come get protected while they going crazy. Israel, my firstborn, my baby. Israel, my firstborn, my baby. I woke you up in your land of captivity. I do not change, I want you to remember me. Laws and commandments, I gave you the remedy. Go read the testimonies for your memory. I sent them prophets, but you wasn't hearing me. I come to you if you really come near to me. I heard your cry, now it's time to take it to me. I know what got you from all of your enemies. Who you know open the sea. Them waters was bitter, but I made it sweet. Case you ain't know how to swim, I'm your protector, so I made you walk on your feet. This a reminder you married to me. I just want you to be all I called you to be. They called you niggas, but I made you priests. I'm about to give you back everything. I'm sending plagues for you. I'm sending boys, drying up rivers. I leave them dead for you. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. You heard what I said for you. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. You heard what I said for you. For you, you only ever known. Y'all the main ones I'm watching on my throne. Created everything, but I called you my own. That land I gave you, put my name on it, my home. Yeah, that's my home. Israel. I'm the reason you in captivity. We made a covenant, you ain't remember me. You broke the covenant, I sent your enemy. Get out my lane since you wasn't fearing me. I'm the reason they put you in chains. I'm the reason they switched up your name. I'm the reason why you in the hood. I'm the reason of all your pain. I'm sending flows fast daily. Think I don't love you. Y'all my babies. Gave my son. Must be crazy. Come out that system, come out of that lady. They got that military, it would not phase me. It would not move me. It would not graze me. Remember Egypt. I did all that for my people. You only ever know. Y'all the main ones I'm watching on my throne. Created everything, but I called you my own. That land I gave you, put my name on it, my home. Yeah, that's my home. You only ever know. Y'all the main ones I'm watching on my throne. Created everything, but I called you my own. That land I gave you, put my name on it, my home. Yeah, that's my home. Israel.